Drilling fluids touch just about everything in the drilling process. We're here to deconstruct the drilling process and drilling fluid concepts to provide a deeper understanding of our industry. In each episode, we'll share information, talk to interesting people, and maybe share a few stories along the way. Welcome to the Flowline, a production of AES Drilling Fluids, brought to you by Matt Offenbacher and Justin Gauthier.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another amazing episode of the Flowline podcast. Matt, lovely co-host, how's it going, man? Feels like we haven't been in the studio for over a week.
Well, I mean, summertime, a little vacation, a little time off, and back to it.
Back to it is. We were actually, for the audience, having an interesting conversation, one that I'm sure a lot of people are having nowadays, just around AI and stuff like that. But I was reading something on X, aka Twitter, and Matt kind of laughed and was like, "Yeah, well, there's talks about, within like a year, AI will be writing stuff based on AI," and so it was just kind of funny, but I think it's real. And so, what was it that you were sort of like referring to?
Well, in essence, that because AI is using all this existing content to make content, and then that now they're all scraping each other's sources, that it's AI writing stuff based off of what other AI put together, and ultimately you'll run out of anything original on the internet to find. And sort of just ultimately it leads to saturation of like very stale information and content.
Yeah. Or even seeing, again, like even artists like music. There was something I'd seen, I don't know if it was a news article or whatever, but there's an AI generated band that created an album that's on Spotify and apparently is like blowing up on the charts. And, there's those like purists that are like, I'm not going on Spotify. Like I've canceled my subscription. But yeah, it's just like making its way into every sort of facet of our lives. And then I was telling Matt, I heard there's a bunch of folks or, a group of whatever are trying to promote anytime there's content created that you could have sort of a logo or a way to to know that it's human or original content. So like, for food, for instance, it's like GMO free or gluten free, having something within the content that you're either looking at or listening to and like, this is created by a human. And people may seek out that original content versus just not knowing what you're reading, seeing, listening to, whether or not it's actually someone that's made it, or to your point, just regurgitating other AI stuff. But I think it's something to really consider about when you're as we move forward, and even our business, maybe like young folks coming in trying to grow their knowledge base, especially. But yeah,
we remain human.
Yeah, this is human generated for those who are wondering. I'm pretty sure there's like several podcasts that are just purely AI generated.
I mean, you can make that like Notebook LM. It's kind of interesting because, right, if you're looking for a shortcut or whatever, you can put like a bunch of podcasts in Notebook LM and be like, give me a 30-minute podcast using their voices and consolidate all this, which I think is interesting, but it's sort of like, it undermines the learning process, right? Like,
Yeah.
Obviously, if I'm looking for information I kind of know about, I think it's super helpful, but I also find that there's sort of the accidental, the happy accidents. You're listening to a conversation or something comes up that is purely organic, unscripted, and ultimately helps you learn something. And I think that's harder to imitate. I mean, I'm sure they'll try, but yeah. So
no kidding. Speaking of just the human touch, something I'm excited about today. We have a group of folks coming in, customers coming to tour the lab.
yes,
And don't worry, folks, we're going to get into what we're talking about today. But when I haven't seen Matt, I just have lots of fun, exciting things to talk about. Anyway, so pumped about that. And I guess for the listeners, me personally, I just really love when people come visit the lab. It gives that sort of, again, someone to be able to see it, maybe even put their hands on some things, but just sort of that interaction and us being able to walk them through our lab. And so I'm curious, Matt, because you've done the lab tours several times, whether it's mud schools, customers, maybe vendors. What does that typically look like? Like, walk us through a typical day in the lab, walk-through tour.
I think a big part is if you want to make anything interesting, you kind of have to tell a story, right? And so I like to start with sort of the strategy of what we do, breaking it up into troubleshooting versus R&D versus kind of some of the other sort of broader technical support. And so having good stories of examples of where we've executed on those things and how the tools that you're looking at contribute to that.
Mm.
Um, I think I mean I think people find that pretty interesting. Like the challenge with a lab is most of the work is just mixing stuff and measuring it, but that's not what people want. Like, our analytical stuff is all at the front, and that's the really expensive, fancy equipment. It does really cool things,
Yeah.
but normally, like, it all starts with mixing up and measuring a barrel of mud, a lab equivalent, or getting some baseline measurements
Yeah.
and doing that over and over again, and then you go to the fancy stuff. But it is also, I think, really cool. I mean, I think I just get energized telling the story because of, we have these great people who've come up with, novel methods to measure things. Like they can prove that this is how I can tell you exactly how much of this material is in this. Um, hey, we had a customer who had this problem and we developed this whole process,
Mm-hmm.
and now we serve other customers doing the same thing. It was sort of like the challenge brought out the best in everybody, and they came up with a new way to do something that um, is it required the right tools, but the right people using the right tools.
Yeah.
So those things I think kind of get me energized as I try and tell those stories.
That's great.
But and it's fun. We have some cool toys that I think if you took college chemistry or any of those kinds of things, like you can kind of geek out at just how the different pieces of equipment work.
Yeah.
So
No, it's great. Do you have any random question, but do you have any like tour bloopers or maybe on the flip side, like you did a tour and like something unexpected came of it and it was like, man, because of this tour, like we actually were able to do XYZ, or a client, decided they wanted to then pursue something. Does anything come to mind?
I mean, I would say the thing that many customers get inspired by is I think they're used to seeing us as a mud company. And when we talk about being able to do detailed, petrophysical analysis, characterizing mineralogy, a lot of times we'll get pretty tightly linked up with geology departments,
Yeah.
and maybe help them solve problems that you would normally expect a mud company to be dealing with. But because we have the capabilities and the skills, we're able to do that. I think on the blooper side, I will just say that like all sort of laboratory demos, there's even the stuff that you've done 100 times, the one time it doesn't work the way you expected is probably going to be in front of a bunch of people you're trying to impress. So I think there's a little bit of like, wipe some sweat off your brow sometimes on stuff that you're like, this should work. Um, and especially when you're like, well, this has never happened before. So we always try to make sure those are, those demos are pretty well refined.
Yeah.
But you can be surprised, and hopefully, we've generally seen customers can kind of laugh with us when those things happen, and we'll do it again and it'll work. Like this is what we went to show you, So, but we've had a few of those where it was like, and this is how this works, and then it's like, and it's not doing what I said.
Yeah. Well, I remember walking down the hallway and Will Petty ran out, sweating and kind of stressed out. And yeah, I guess some check or something that he had demonstrated 1,000 times, all of a sudden the cord didn't work and the power was not connecting to the instrument or whatever. And
we tripped a breaker, I think, and it was like, this has never happened before. Where's the panel?
yeah, that's what it was.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's funny. It's yeah, life beyond the mud check. It's a lot goes on back there. Anyway, 8 minutes and 30 seconds of banter. Hopefully everyone hung in there. We do have a good topic today, Matt, and one that you said has been brought up multiple times. It's something that, as someone who's worked the MidCon, who've had customers there, and I kind of chuckle when I hear sort of what we're going to talk about today, which is dispersed versus non-dispersed. And I guess for those, who are in the mix, sometimes lightly dispersed, you get a whole variance of different types of water-based muds when you're talking about dispersed versus non-dispersed. But I think it'd be good to kind of clear the air, break down each one, maybe refresh people's memories on that part. What do you think?
I think so. It's interesting how often this comes up for what I would say are pretty basic mud systems, but then again, because you've got that spectrum, as you sort of alluded to, okay, are we dispersed? Are we not? Are we lightly dispersed? And I think it won't take long to sort of hash that out and hopefully offer some clarity.
Okay. Well, first, sort of define, what that means to be either dispersed or non-dispersed.
So it all starts with clay that's in your mud, usually bentonite, but you think about a clay platelet, and it's got very narrow edges, so it's very plate-like shape. So the edges are thin, but the top and bottom surfaces are big, surface area wise. Um, and so there's two different charges there. So the flat face is negatively charged. The edges are negatively charged. The flat face is generally positively charged. But what happens is you're going to have these things want to stick to each other, negative and positive meeting up, right? So um, you can end up, as these clay platelets associate, they can either, go like this or, make a T kind of where a negative edge sticks to a positive face. And think of building up a network. So maybe like a bird's nest or a house of cards
Yeah.
where they're all interacting. That's what can happen. And one way to address that is to disperse it. So if you want to go disperse because you're having that association issue, you would add something highly anionic and basically just tie up all those positive charges. Now stuff can't stick to itself because all you have is negative, negative. So
Got it.
that limits that association. And as you might be able to imagine, that lightly dispersed, if you will, you can have so many anionic particles that nothing can associate, or you could have a few, and so there are still some associations. You still see some of that effect on your mud properties. And so I think that's sort of in general. Non-dispersed, I didn't do anything to it. Dispersed, I added a dispersant explicitly to break up these networks as they form. So that is sort of the baseline of everything we're going to talk about.
Got it. Okay, well, let's double click on the old LSND, also known as low solids non-dispersed system, and break that down.
So I think this is one where the definition can be quite a bit vague too, in as much as something that is relatively low in solids and you didn't add a dispersant gives a whole lot of other options for what it could be. So typically these are, they're not going to be more than about 13 pounds per gallon of any flavor. And the reason is simply that you've got to disperse solids when you get that many in your drilling fluid. Like your fluid properties are a mess. If you go back to when, the literature starts talking about these, the drill solids to bentonite ratio is less than 3-to-1. Okay, that's the argument for the definition of low solids, or the ratio that was applied. Now, if I can keep my solids down, we've talked about this in other in other episodes, I can generally drill faster, right? So you don't want your solids to come up or you sort of lose the benefit. You're just running an old traditional spud mud. But here, what you likely have in your LS&D system, traditionally speaking, you got some gel, so bentonite, so a clay. You've got pack, maybe for fluid loss, maybe a little bit of xanthan. You might throw in some PHPA. You might throw in some sodium polyacrylate as a bit of a thinner. But the most important thing when we get into that non-dispersed is you didn't add anything in as a dispersant, such as a lignite or a lignosulfonate. So once you start adding those, you've gone dispersed. But the other thing I would add is technically polymeric systems fall under this sort of argument, although I think LSND I typically associate with a cheap, basic mud system. But, a glycol system, a high-performance water-based mud, all those things are going to have low solids, silicates. Silicates don't like solids. They're not going to be dispersed, so they're not going to have anything, they're not going to have lignite or lignosulfonate in them. So, like, they would sort of qualify, if you will, because they're not dispersed, but I would not call them LS&D systems.
Got it. No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so kind of beyond that, what are some sort of considerations if you're planning on potentially using an LS&D mud? What are things that you should really look at to sort of as a criteria around whether or not you should use LS&D?
I mean, a big filter is going to be salinity. If you expect to take flows relatively shallow or encounter something where you're even drill through some salt, this is a clay-based system, and you're going to get flocculation. Like, that's going to induce flocculation, which will ultimately mean you need to break it over and disperse it or do something. So salinity is usually a big decision maker. I think there's a reasonable argument to say that because that low solids aspect, you need good solids control equipment. which you to keep the solids down, you're going to have to aggressively dilute. Um, you know, reactive clays, obviously, for adding more clay, we're seeing more flocculation. That's where high temperatures, those are going to limit how far you go with LSND. And I mean, it's not uncommon that you start with an LSND system and then you break it over to a
Totally, yep.
dispersed as you get deeper and see these things.
Right.
So LSND is pretty common on surface or intermediate. You're trying to keep the solids down, drill fast, keep that kind of thing. That's the goal. But it's a pretty basic gel with a little bit of polymer. And don't let your drill solids get too high and kind of aggravate things.
Yeah, in areas where I've used it, like you said, it's been like that 9 to 9.2. We actually had some, and it was maybe area specific, but we would often take saltwater flow, and in the way we were running it is we were making sure there was like no clay in there. So it actually was a little bit more tolerant on the salt side, but to your point, like, because you kind of mentioned like limited salinity tolerance, it depends on how much clay you put in there. Because you can, like we alluded to earlier, is like you can run these things kind of like in different ways.
Yes.
And so like, ours was almost like an all polymer LSND.
Yeah, more like a polymeric, base, yeah.
Right. And we were purposely not adding a single sack of gel. But then once we started having to weight up, then we would slowly start flipping it over or turning it over, mudding up and going to more of that dispersed gel type mud. But anyway, no, it serves a purpose, certainly. And it is shear thinning. It would be more shear thinning than it would a gel kind of chem mud, would it? If you're using a lot of polymer?
I would say, polymer would be more shear, more thixotropic, if you will. So yeah, xanthan especially will give you those flow properties.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, then moving on to the other side of the coin, let's talk more about dispersed drilling fluids.
Well, and this is pretty easy because normally we're just taking our base. So yeah, you had some gel in there. You probably had some pack and some of those other things. And now you're going to start adding the dispersant and that thus making it dispersed. And there's a few different flavors of dispersed, but mostly it's going to be these anionic black powders. So we're talking about chrome lignosulfonate, lignite, quebracho even, which...
That's a new one.
So quebracho's actually been around for a long time, and because I know these folks, and they yelled at me last time for not including the trade name, I believe we're allowed to, but Desco is a modified quebracho material.
What? I
Yes.
never knew that. I've never heard quebracho.
Yeah. So it's from a bark. It turns everything red.
No way.
But anyways, there's this process. The thing about the modified quebracho is it versus like a CLS, or you got to keep your pH up high. This stuff is not as pH sensitive, so you don't have to be as aggressive with black water and that kind of thing. So the key is anionic, ties up those charges, gives you great dispersion. So as your fluid starts to thicken and you have these adverse properties, you can break those clays that are sticking to each other apart. And now you've got individual clay platelets, which can help with fluid loss. They're obviously going to help with fluid properties in general. And so this is really where you start kind of breaking things over.
Got it.
So you might do your upper intermediate with an LSND, and then as you get deeper and you say, hey, I kind of need some properties here, start throwing in your dispersant material.
Gotcha. Is there anything that would sort of when you're looking at planning or anything like that, would there anything determine like, oh, you're going to experience this? Absolutely don't use a dispersed drilling fluids.
I mean, I think if you're really worried about washout or something, and it depends on the type of washout, right? Like in the MedCon, it's a bunch of this red bed stuff it's got a lot of salt in it. It's a little bit wonky. So it's like, yeah, me personally, I would wait because I think I could drill a lot faster. But eventually, once you get past those sections, you're probably just going to go ahead and disperse. Usually it's the other side of things. It's that my decision to like whether I'm going to go with dispersed or not, like my base case is LSND, and when do I disperse?
Yeah.
Because dispersed mud systems, like you said, there's a lot of flavors of these things, but these things can be broken over to give you great heat tolerance. They heavier mud weights. They can do a lot of things. So in all likelihood, the deeper you get, in a lot of formations that you're drilling with water-based mud, you're probably going dispersed unless you're going to some specialized polymeric system.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I was gonna kind of go on the other side of it. Like, what are some good reasons to consider? So you mentioned mud weight, temperature. What about like filter cake quality? Can you sort of compare and contrast the filter cake quality to the two?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on what else is in there, but certainly looking at just sometimes you can see once again, this depends a lot on how much gel is in it,
Yeah.
right? But gel may take a little longer to form a filter cake than a polymer does. And so depending on your solids content, you may, if you're worried about fluid loss, you may go very low solids, or you may go dispersed but keep the gel out and focus more on pack and that kind of thing. So that I think I can get there with both options, but it really depends on what I'm doing, what's going to be the most cost effective.
Yeah.
So it's definitely something to keep an eye on. With an LSND system, you don't have to have the pH up, which in some formations is pretty good to get through some of the gumbo-y stuff. But you have to have a higher pH for a lignosulfonate system.
Right.
So at that point, hopefully you're through a lot of the real reactive stuff.
Right. Got it. Well, good. I think that gives a pretty solid breakdown, Matt. I can't think of any other questions. Any sort of closing last thoughts around the two?
I mean, I guess the short of it is these are probably more similar systems than people let on as we try and draw distinctions. Yes, they kind of work on a spectrum where you can start adding lignite, lignosulfonate, and partially disperse or what have you. But there's reasons to use one or the other for the fluid properties you're looking for, but they're quite similar because they're sort of starting from the same base. So they're cousins.
Nice. Well, with that being said, folks, if you have any other questions, thoughts, reach out to us on LinkedIn, or you can reach us at the Flowline podcast at aesfoods.com. Be sure to connect with the AES LinkedIn page, as well as check out the YouTube page. We got a lot of great content on there. The website has a ton of good information as well. And until next time, folks, that's it for now. Cheers.
Take care.
Thanks for listening. Please tune in next week for another exciting episode of the Flowline. And remember, may your returns always be full and your trips always smooth. Views expressed in this program belong to participants and not their employees. The program is for informational purposes only and cannot take the place of seeking professional advice. Copyright AES Drilling Fluids.